What's up and welcome into Renner Ranks. I am the Messenger's NFL draft analyst, Mike Renner. On today's show, we are ranking the most underrated players in the NFL with help from my good buddy, Jon Ledyard, NFL draft and NFL analyst. And among those underrated, there's a guy on a rookie contract who I think is a top 3 LT, left tackle in the NFL, not getting his due, and a guy in a rookie contract who I believe is a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL, neither getting their due at the moment, that we'll touch on. Let's get it.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Very special shout out to you everydayers out there. You know who you are. As I mentioned, Jon Ledyard, NFL analyst, former Locked On Podcast Network host himself, used to host Locked On NFL Drafts with Trevor Sikkema back in the day. He got out of the podcast and content game for a while to pursue a higher calling, which I respect the heck out of. The man has principles. I wish I will do that. Hope I will do something like that someday, but he couldn't stay away. He loves ball too much. I saw him tweeted about some guys that he thinks are underrated, some guys he's a fan of. And so I said, Jon, let's get you on the show to talk about it. So here it is, NFL analyst Jon Ledyard and I breaking down who we believe are the most underrated players in the NFL.
All right, Jon, we're ranking the top 5 most underrated players. I'm going to kick it to you first. I'm going to give you the honors. Who is your number 5 most underrated player in the NFL? I know you said you had a lot here. You had a lot of guys you're debating. You got to put it.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Pen to paper here. Who's number 5?
I know this is where it gets difficult because I don't know necessarily like how to rank levels of underratedness, because in my circles, like players are going to be more discussed maybe than yours. So I'll just kind of like talk about the players I think are underrated. I think Josh Reynolds of the Lions is one of the most underrated players in the entire league. Like, I think everything you ask him to do, he does at a high level. He isn't an unbelievable athlete. I think coming out of college, he was billed as this contested catch monster, and that was his thing, and people fell in love with that thing. And typically those types of players come with some warning signs. And I think early in his career, that was probably true. And then he's just figured out how to play wide receiver at a super high level. Like, you could play him inside, you could play him outside. He can stack man coverage on the outside and win vertically, and he can still go up and get the ball for sure. Oh, by the way, he can also play in the slot, and if you need him to find the hole in the zone, he'll sit down in the zone. Oh, Jared Goff throws 2 yards behind him, and you need him to contort his body and snatch the ball out of the air like he did the other day. He could do that. You want him to block, he'll root out a linebacker. One of the few wide receivers in the NFL that I actually think literally blocks. Everybody always loves to say, oh, he'll block. I watch a lot of these guys and I'm like, they don't actually block, like once or twice a game. Reynolds will get after you on a consistent basis with good technique. He's just kind of like a self-made guy who's like shaped his way into being a really good, like late blooming player. And he's having a career year so far in Detroit.
I know I'm personally somewhat guilty of this, and a lot of like the general public, especially at wide receiver. Your wide receiver is unique to this, where you're either a 1,200-yard wide receiver or you stink. Feel like there's like a lot of people don't think there's an in-between. A lot of people don't think there's roles for, like I did it in Green Bay with Allen Lazard. Like Allen Lazard was a guy, I'm like, he stinks. Well, it's like, no, Allen Lazard can't necessarily separate first man coverage, but he can do a lot of other things really well. Mm-hmm. That's somewhat of who Josh Reynolds is. And also people don't think that wide receivers can develop as well. Usually it's like year 3, who you are then, that's who you're always going to be. There's no like next level that you can get to, and guys can still improve. I think you see it.
Yeah.
You saw it with like Christian Kirk and him down in Jacksonville. And I think Josh Reynolds also fits that bill. All right. My number 5, I'm going to go with, I went with a couple high end guys and a few mid tier guys, but this is one of my high end guys. I think Christian Darrisaw, the Vikings left tackle, is a top 3 left tackle in the NFL right now. I don't think he gets discussed that way. His 3rd-year tackle right now was not, billed as a super high-end prospect by any means. But I flip on the tape and I see a guy who, 6'5", 315. He's super light on his feet at that size. And that's like a smaller end tackle. But then play strength-wise, like he hits guys like a 350-pound tackle. When he hits them like with his punch, when he absorbs a blow in pass protection, like he hits guys like a Jordan Mailata hits guys. And he's not even close to that size. That guy is so solidly built, and he just, consistently plays the same game, doesn't get low after he does give up pressures. It's not a guy who will let stuff compound and rarely has like these ugly games because of it. So I think Christian Darrisaw is not necessarily discussed in that, was not a Pro Bowler last year. I think very much should be a Pro Bowler this year. And if not, an all-pro, depending on how guys like, Tristan Wirfs, Trent Williams, how they stay healthy, how they play the rest of the year. But I think he's in just behind those two guys at the left tackle position right now.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. Those are the two you got out of him. It's so interesting because Darrisaw I had him on my list, and then I was like, is he underrated enough? I don't know. I don't hear anybody talk about him, but like, I feel like he's just been good. Like, he's not really like, so he was so funny in college to watch because I was like, this guy just doesn't move with any urgency at all. Like, it was just like times you're just like, is he awake? Like, what is this guy doing? And then you would see him in the NFL, and it's like the same calm, like controlled demeanor. But then all of a sudden, when he does hit somebody, it's like he just stuns them, like with how strong and powerful he is. His tape this year to me has been, when he's been healthy, has been amongst the most fun to watch. So I completely agree with that one. Another guy for me, and this is where I toe the line between, is he still underrated? I think going into the year, he definitely would have been. I think maybe it's just because I watch him every week because I'm doing the Chiefs All 22 for SB Nation or not. But Trent McDuffie to me is one of the best. I think he might be one of the best all-around corners in the league right now. I think most people know he's good. I don't know if people realize like he might be like legit special, like falling number ones, shadowing guys in coverage, man coverage, zone coverage, tackling, awesome tackler, even though he's smaller. So yeah, technically he might miss a tackle too, but how often he's in place to make a tackle, and then the run defense from your nickel position. He kind of gives you everything you need, and then he can also play outside. Like, to me, I don't know if there's many more valuable things in today's NFL in a secondary than a corner can play inside or outside and doesn't have a weakness in their skill set.
So I try to keep my list away from guys first, second year who emerging in the NFL who just may not have gotten like the hype to catch up to, just because they're so new to the league. Yeah. But like, he was one who I wanted to put on still because he is truly like a special. He's what makes, why the Chiefs defense, they're second in points per game allowed this year. Like, he is making them go because he doesn't allow anything easy from the slot. Like, he is as good as it gets against two-way goes in slot man coverage. And they do a lot of that, press from the slot. Like, that's hard to do. Like, on the outside, you can use the sideline. You have help usually. Pressing from the slot is not easy, and he's about as good as it gets in the league. And then all the other things you mentioned there, the versatility, just the way he sees the game, the way he plays the game. Yeah, Trent McDuffie is at minimum like the best slot / versatile corner in the league, if not amongst the best in the league right now.
Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. So let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. George Pickens got further locked as a second-year wide receiver for the Steelers before the Week 6 bye, hooking up with second-year QB Kenny Pickett for 6 catches, 130 yards, and a big TD on 10 targets against the Ravens. He also added a rush for 16 yards. Pickens is just being trusted to make plays even in tough matchups by his young passer with whom he has great chemistry. The Rams and Jaguars aren't the easiest draws in his next 2 games, but Pickens' physical talent can rise above them with his size and field stretching ability. And brother, I have him in my Dynasty League. I drafted him in the mid-rounds, and I'm happy as heck that I did. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, my number 4. I'm going to go with Chicago Bears running back Khalil Herbert. I think he kind of gets talked about because he's in a little bit of a RB by committee there in Chicago. He doesn't have a full workload necessarily, and he's never been like a bell cow for them. But to me, he reminds me of like early career Aaron Jones before everyone kind of caught up where it's like, oh, Aaron Jones can actually be a dude. He's averaged 5.1 yards per attempt for his career. He has burst. He has vision. His cuts are always at full speed. And I think that's like an underrated thing for running backs is how much gather they need to cut and how much they need like to come to a stop. I always go back to like Najee Harris needs to come to like a full stop before he makes a cut a lot of the times. Whereas Khalil Herbert will on the fly make a cut, 50 degrees, 60 degrees, and just like doesn't stop, won't stop his feet, won't need any gather. He just goes. And I think that's massive to running in the NFL because the holes are so tight. They close so quickly, and you can't necessarily break tackles always by shaking guys because guys rally to the football too fast. And so how he breaks tackles is just one cuts, gets guys to bounce off him. I think Khalil Herbert is, maybe not like top 5 running back in the NFL, but I think he's, a top 12 back probably in the league right now. And that's probably not something that a lot of people would say, even though his production when it's like on a per touch basis would suggest it is true.
That is funny. I've always enjoyed watching Herbert when I see him, but I don't feel like I watch him enough or like that he's gotten opportunities enough really to be thought of it that way. Also, he's a running back and that position doesn't matter. So I didn't want to.
No, exactly. Surprised I put him. All right,
yeah, that's a good one. I would say, okay, so I'm teetering on the line of like who's actually underrated and who isn't, but I think one of the players that consistently impresses me when I watch him is Osa Odigizua for the Dallas Cowboys. And I don't think he's talked about in the tiers of top, probably even tier 1 or tier 2 of defensive tackles. And I'm not saying he's tier 1 with like Chris Jones and Aaron Donald and those guys, but like, I do think he may be like a guy that's moving into that tier 2 range, especially this season watching him. There's not many weaknesses to his game. He kind of although he's like lighter and a little bit smaller for a defensive tackle, he plays with this just incredible center of gravity and his quickness as an interior player, like the ability for him to play through gaps without being a liability holding the point of attack too. So kind of, you've got a ability to do both. You're kind of a complete defensive tackle. He may not be like the most dynamic pass rusher in the league, but he's absolutely an asset in that regard. So just the fact that you don't have to really take him off the field, you can play him on different roles on defense. You can move him around the defensive front. You don't have to necessarily worry about him against different schemes or anything. You kind of just do everything. The floor is really high. And I think he's also gotten like incrementally better over the last couple of years. So yeah, we're probably not talking about elite players. Like I mentioned McDuffie maybe being actually moving into a tier of maybe elite players at some point. But to me, the rest of these guys probably are going to be in that group. But I would say that Odigizua is probably one of those guys that's just like extremely solid across the board.
I love that call out. I think he's just a guy who, he came in undersized and just needed like the play strength to catch up because you saw like the flashes early on in his career. Like, you don't win kind of the way he did on the interior without knowing how to win. And I think it's a big part of just like winning as a pass rusher is having that to his game. And this year you finally just like see it. I feel like this year you had that play on Monday night where he literally just gets off the ball, like meets the running back at the mesh point. And he has the kind of burst to be a game changer and like really take that D line to the next level because it's, one of the best D line in the NFL. All right. My number 3, this one's a call. This one's a weird call. And I don't know why I put it, but Andy Dalton is incredibly underrated in my opinion.
Wow.
The Carolina Panthers backup quarterback.
True, but I also never would have expected it. Like,
I think he's one of the most underrated players in the league. To me, he is Derek Carr without some of the good play callers that Derek Carr had over the course of his career, aka John Gruden when he had him, and some of the talent that Derek Carr had when he had Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. And now he was good when he did have talent. When he had those wide receivers back 2013, 2014, Cincinnati Bengals days, 2015, he was good. Now, he still takes too many sacks. Like that's probably his biggest downfall is that he'll just like curl up into a shell in a pocket sometimes and take sacks. But you just look at what he did for the Saints last year, what he did for the Panthers against this good Seahawks defense this year. Like if he was on the Jets right now, they'd be a playoff team. And that has value, obviously, when you have a good defense. Now he's not a guy who's going to carry you, but I think people talk about Andy Dalton as if like, like a laughing stock, like as if like he's like the bar for, quarterbacks that are, don't belong to be stars in the NFL. When I think if you're just ranking every quarterback in the league right now, he's somewhere in the 20 to 22 range. I'd put him. I think he's a starter in the league who just, hasn't gotten those opportunities because no one wants to settle for 22nd best star in the league. But Andy Dalton, underrated because of that, in my opinion.
That's a very interesting one because, yeah, I mean, like if the Falcons had Andy Dalton this season, would they be? Yes. I mean, would they be like they'd be number 1 in the division? They'd be undefeated. Like
A lot of teams could use Andy Dalton right now. He went for 360 yards against Seahawks. Seahawks have been averaging I think 230 a game to everyone else. They just made Joe Burrow look very pedestrian. Right. And
looked good last year.
Here's your next one.
It's kind of like he's gotten better with age, honestly, in some ways. Okay, my next one is one of my favorite players to watch in the entire league. And I think he still qualifies as underrated, although he's going to get paid, I think. And so I don't think it's going to last much longer. Quincy Williams for the Jets is just, I love him, dude, because he just doesn't care. Like, he might make a mistake. He's going to make it at full speed. He's kind of like if you watch some of these rookies like Dorian Williams and Henry Tioto or however you say that name for the Texans, like those guys are just like what Quincy Williams was. But if you develop those guys, that's what they want. Like Quincy Williams is like the dream player, right? Like everybody wants to be able to find a linebacker in the mid rounds, just this raw athlete who's aggressive, physical, all these kind of things, and build them into this cerebral, quick trigger downhill, also good in coverage, can rush the passer, like all of these great things. And it hardly ever happens. And it's happened with Quincy Williams. Like, he's one of the best linebackers in the league right now. He can do everything. He can stay on the field 3 downs. He's making plays in coverage now. Like, the full game feels like it's rounded out for Quincy Williams. And I just can't believe the come up for him. Like, from a seldom discussed draft prospect whose brother was the top pick, one of the top prospects of the draft, to now being like on that level of being one of the best linebackers in the league is pretty crazy.
I feel like he's the perfect line. He's like what you want at linebacker nowadays. Like, you don't want the guy who's just going to secure plays in front of them. You want the guy who creates negative plays, right? Like you want, with how everyone's trying to just move the ball downfield, sustain drives against like defenses trying to put caps on stuff. You want the linebacker who, like, you can afford maybe giving up a guy who, let's say, running back get to the safety level. That's fine. But you want the guy who's going to take that screen pass and turn it into -3 yards. The guy who's going to like break up a pass, going to come downhill on a running back, meet him on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And like Quincy Williams has been like that guy this year. He really has the light switch, whatever it is, whatever it takes to play linebacker like that. It's come on from him. All right, my number 2. I have a linebacker myself, but it is not quite. He is a 3-4 outside linebacker, a true 3-4 outside linebacker. It is Andrew Van Ginkel, the Miami Dolphins.
Oh, he was on my longer list. Yeah,
dude, he's like a 90% Clay Matthews right now. Like, he goes, and Clay Matthews, God love him, Packers legend. He was a guy who would clown bad DTs, and then a good DT would show up and he would not show up. He was just undersized guys. It's tough to be consistent against better offensive tackles in the NFL. Andrew Van Ginkel, you give him a bottom 10 right tackle in the NFL, he will beat him like a drum every single time. He has like he knows how to win as a pass rusher, 242 pounds. He has good coverage instincts. He's actually pretty fast. He ran a 4.59 coming out of Wisconsin. And he can play on ball, off ball, play in coverage. Like, he's versatile. And I think that's a guy I want in like a 3-4 scheme for sure. And because again, like I said, on 3rd downs, you could trust that guy to win, line him up over the worst offensive lineman. He's going to beat him. So Andrew Van Ginkel, he's getting paid like $2.8 million this year. I think he deserves a little more. I think someone should be covered in that skill set a little bit more this offseason.
Yeah, no, I think he is just kind of one of these, like, self-made guys. Miami seems like they've found kind of the ways to develop some of these guys, and it's really like working up front with a lot of their defensive linemen that they've gotten. He's one of those guys. It feels like he's kind of gotten better every year and is able to fill kind of like a well-rounded all-around role as well.
The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever feel like your brain is getting in its own way? Like, you know what you should do, what's good for you, but you just can't do it? Therapy helps you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself. I have been there personally. I have used BetterHelp. I love the convenience. I love that I could just do it from my bedroom because sometimes I didn't want to get out of bed, and that helped me to do so. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon.
Okay, so for the next one,
number 1.
Yeah, okay,
it's the most underrated one.
The most underrated. I mean, okay, here's the reality. Like, I think this guy might be the best safety in the NFL. So this is like, if we're talking about the degrees of this. So when I think most underrated, I think player who is almost never discussed in this light, in my opinion, but it like probably deserves to be, and that's Jevon Holland from Miami. And I think that although he's kind of moving up I still never see him discussed on a national scale. Like, I don't feel like anybody brings him up for any awards, anything. And every time you watch him play, it's like the guy doesn't make a mistake. He makes plays on the ball. He can play in coverage. He can play against the run. Like, he feels like an all around complete dynamic player. And I know he's mostly a free safety there, but we know he's played closer into the nickel and the slot as well in the past in college. That was really effective in that role. He's got 124 snaps there this season, or in the box this season as well, and 61 in the slot. So he's just become, no matter what you do, no matter what you put on his plate, he's become dynamic. I don't think anybody lists him when they talk about the top defensive players in the game. So if we're talking about degrees of underratedness, I would say like he's probably a better known name than some of the guys that I've said, but I don't think anybody talks about him in the conversation he should be discussed in.
I 100% agree. And it was like what you said there first. He doesn't make mistakes. Like doesn't miss tackles, doesn't take bad angles to the football. Like, and he's only 23 still. The guy is super young.
That's crazy.
Third year in the league. Like he is. Yeah, I am with you on that one. My last one, my number one, is in a somewhat similar light in that everyone knows he's good. I think this guy is, I think he's the third best wide receiver in the NFL. I think Brandon Ayuk is the third best wide receiver in the NFL. I think it's Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and then Brandon Ayuk. I watched this guy go up against the Cleveland Browns secondary this past week, and they didn't put up big numbers, but the Browns just played man across the board. And obviously the Cleveland Browns secondary is, maybe the best secondary in the NFL right now with Denzel Ward, with MJ Emerson, with Greg Newsome. Like, they go three across of guys that are tough matchups for anyone. Cooked them all like a drum. Like, no one was coming close to him in that game. Can run every level of the football field. To me, like I said, it's Tyreek, Justin Jefferson in terms of separation ability, in terms of all around what I would want a wide receiver. And then it's him. He's only 14th in receiving yards, only 25 catches. Some of that's just the product of that offense and how they scheme things up. But I think that, I truly believe that he is in that category of just all around impossible to guard right now. And that's, there's not a lot of guys in that. There's not a lot of guys in that tier that I'd say that you just can't guard one-on-one, with Devontae Adams getting up there in age, and DeAndre Hopkins getting up there in age. I think he's number 3, like I said.
Yeah, no, he would certainly be in that conversation for me as well. I mean, I think I'm like the biggest Deebo Samuel fan, I feel like, in the world, but this would be the first year. I was actually just thinking about this the other day when I was writing. I was like, would I put Ayuk ahead of Deebo now? And I think I definitely would. Although obviously they're a little bit different. Deebo's a little bit different than all the other top receivers probably in the league. But I just think Ayuk is that, like, when you watch him, it's like, I don't know that anybody can match up with this guy because he's that good at the top of the route. We're talking about like just elite of the elite at the top of the route in terms of breaking things off and be footwork and all of that stuff. And then after the catch, obviously really dynamic as well. Yeah. So there's really not a weakness to his game, in my opinion, other than, I know he had a couple drops last week, but I don't see that as an overarching weakness as well. Yeah. So he has to be in that conversation moving into that echelon of wideouts.
All right. There you have it. Our top 5 most underrated players in the NFL. John, I know you have your hands in a lot of things right now. Let the people know where they can all find you. I know there's like 5 or 6 different places where they can find you. Let's hear them all.
Oh, man, get ready. Okay, Chiefs and Lions fans, I'm doing all 22 breakdowns every week for SB Nation's newsletters, Pride of Detroit and Arrowhead Pride. Check out those if you're a Chiefs or a Lions fan, because you can get all 22 breakdowns on each game. I talk about players in depth and all kinds of points from the games in those pieces. So check out those newsletters you can subscribe to. If you're a fan of the NFL, Ollie Connolly and I talk about the NFL each week on Audibles and Analytics, which is my Substack podcast. So you can check that out. If you're a Bucks fan, I also do a Bucks podcast over there on Audibles and Analytics once a week. So you can check both those podcasts out for a pretty cheap subscription. I think it's like $4.17 a month or something like that. So pretty cheap subscription. If you're not in any of the subscriptions, it's not bad. There's a cup of coffee or something like that. And then if you're not into subscription stuff and you're a Steelers fan, the Yins No Ball podcast with PFFer Brad Spielberger and I do that a couple times a week as well, talking Steelers. So lots of different options to find me. And then I'm on Twitter at Ledyard NFL Draft.
Awesome stuff, dude. We'll have to get back on during the draft, rank some draft prospects, but appreciate you coming on.
Oh, man. I'll be excited for that. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Ooh, that was fun. I love a good underrated talk always, because that means you're giving guys some due that you think they deserve. Now, I hate the underrated policemen out there who are going to say, I have them rated that highly. I have them there. Well, good. I hope you do. I hope you agree with me. I hope everyone agrees with me now after listening to this podcast. Very fun talking to Jon Ledyard, as I said. We'll probably have him on either later this season or sometime during the draft. But who we're going to have on every single week is my brother, Austin Gale. Comes on the show tomorrow. We are ranking. We finally figured it out. And he's going to be on every Thursday, I believe, hopefully, as long as his schedule permits. We're ranking trade scenarios we want to see. Upcoming deadline, October 31st. Halloween is the deadline. 2 weeks of hopefully some movement. There are some guys we want to see moved. So we're going to rank trade scenarios prior to the deadline. Very excited for that. And then Steve Palazzolo comes on Friday, and we're going to be ranking quarterbacks. So jam-packed schedule, hoping to get as many guests as possible here over the next few weeks. And over the course of this podcast, it's more fun when it's not just me ranking it, but it is sometimes fun when it is just me ranking it. There you have it. Renner Ranks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.